Welcome everybody. You're very welcome along to this webinar launch of our issue 8.2 of our RISE journal. I'm going to introduce you now very shortly to the President of the European Federation of Associations and Centres of Irish Studies, Professor Charles Armstrong, who's going to say a few initial words before I introduce our editors and say a bit more about Rise Journal. So, Charles, if you wanted to.
Thanks so much, Seán. Great to see everyone here. I'm really happy to be part of the hosting of this. EFACIS obviously is delighted to have a new issue of RISE, Review of Irish Studies in Europe, published with high-level scholarship on such an important topic. We all live around animals, more or less, and it's an important part of both the environmental cause and also the if you like, our changing thought around human subjectivity. Delighted to see lots of familiar faces. Just want to congratulate Seán and also the editorial team of Maureen, Ina, Maria, and Kirsten, and also the contributors, of course, with what looks like a brilliant issue. So I very much look forward to listening to the roundtable. Thanks.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you very much. So I'm going to begin just giving you, for those of you who may not be or may not be very familiar with our journal, just a little bit about our journal Review of Irish Studies in Europe. We're a journal now that's been in existence for almost 10 years. We were founded in 2016. We are the journal of, as Charles has said, of the European Federation of Associations Centre for Irish Studies. And we're dedicated to bringing together new and innovative research in the very broad field of Irish studies as it now exists, from literature to visual culture to history to politics and indeed into other areas as well. We're oftentimes, if you encounter a journal which is at rise.eu, you'll find often team journals. So a lot of our journals are focused around particular themes, though we also accept non-team submissions. And if you are interested in proposing a themed issue, or you have a non-themed article you'd like to send to us, you can email us at rise@ephasis.eu, and we'll put that email address in the chat shortly. We also have a review section, and if you have, we publish regularly through the EFACIS newsletter a list of books for review, and there's a list out there, I think, seen already available through our website, through the EFACIS website, through our newsletter. And these are directed, if you have an interest in review work, it's directed to our reviews editor, Professor Sylvie Mikowski, at risereviews@ephasis.eu, and I'll put up that information in the chat shortly. One other thing, we also accept articles both in English and the Irish language. So I think that's something that from the beginning, we've considered important, to give a space to the full range of literature from the island of Ireland and from the Irish diaspora. I'm delighted, and we were really delighted when we were approached initially with the theme of this particular issue, which is a really rich and innovative theme, the animal in Ireland, real and imagined. And I think the fact that we are now working towards two issues around this theme is in self indicative of the strength and the richness of the topic. So this is the first issue, and in the spring we'll have a second issue also dedicated to this theme. So I'm incredibly grateful to the editors of this issue and of the forthcoming issue, which I'll come to in a moment. I'm going to introduce them, but I just want to say a few words of thanks also to the editorial board of Rise itself, particularly to Seán Del Tor, who's our webmaster host here, and you can see on your screen who's extraordinary support to everything we do, not just within Rise, but also across EFACIS as the EFACIS coordinator. Also, of course, to Sylvie, Professor Sylvie Mikowski, our reviews editor, to EFACIS president, Professor Charles Armstrong, who's also on our editorial board, to Dr. Joost Augustine from Leiden University in the Netherlands, to Professor Elke Docker at KU Leuven, and Daniela Tianova, Dr. Daniela Tianova at Charles University, Prague, all of whom have contributed hugely to the development and the existence of our journal and the continued strength of our journal over the last, since its founding in 2016. So to come to today's issue and today's launch, as I said, it's on this very rich theme of the animal, Ireland, real and imagined. I want to first of all note as I said, the strength of this issue that brings together a wonderful range of articles that's looking, as I said previously, at literature, not just in English language, but also in the Irish language, that takes us from work that's looking at the Fionn cycle through to poetry in Irish by Seán O'Riordan, Patrick Pearse, Pádraig O'Conor, through to work in English from Sheridan Le Fanu up to writers like John Carson and Sheila Armstrong. So there's an incredibly rich range of work there, all of which are speaking to this very rich topic, the animal in Ireland, real and imagined. And we're incredibly grateful to the editors, to the four editors of this issue, for their great work in bringing together, first of all, for coming up with the theme of the issue, but also bringing together such a rich range of contributions. So if I could just introduce the editors, and then I'll be handing over to them to introduce the contributors. First of all, to Maureen O'Connor. Maureen O'Connor is a senior lecturer in the Department of English in University College Cork. She's published widely in the field of Irish studies, has delivered keynote lectures in Ireland, India, Japan, Austria, Spain, Germany, and France. She's the author of The Female of the Species, The Animal in Irish Women's Writing, and has also co-edited a number of field-defining volumes, including with Derek Gladwin, a special issue of the Canadian Journal of Irish Studies on Irish Studies and Environmental Humanities, with Catherine Lang and Sinead Mooney of Edna O'Brien, New Critical Perspectives, with Lisa Coletta of Wild Colonial Girl, essays on Edna O'Brien. And her most recent monograph, indeed, is focused on Edna O'Brien and the Art of Fiction, which was published by Bucknell University Press in 2021. Enid Bergmann is from the University of Würzburg. Enid is Associate Professor of American Studies at the University of Würzburg in Germany, and she's also co-founder of the Irish Studies Würzburg Center. She's held fellowships with the Rothermere American Institute, the University of Oxford, at the Trinity Long Room Hub Arts Humanities Research Institute at Trinity College Dublin, and at the Huntington Library Arts Collection and Botanical Gardens at San Marino in California, United States. She's the author of 2 monographs, the co-editor of 12 special issue journals and volumes of essays, most recently History and Stories, The Irish Past and Challenges of the Present, as well as a frequent contributor to peer-reviewed journals and international book projects. Maria Eisenmann is a professor of teaching English as a foreign language at the University of Würzburg in Germany, and her research interests encompass global education, digital media literacy, and the teaching of literature, with a particular attention to individual differences in learning. As a founding member of Irish Studies Würzburg, an initiative focused on intercultural learning, she's also had a strong interest in Irish studies and has published extensively on topics related to critical environmental literacies, as well as digital and literary literacy in the EFL classroom. Kirsten Sandrock, finally, the fourth of our editors, is also based at the University of Würzburg, where she teaches and holds the chair of English Literature and Culture. Her research ranges from early modern to contemporary Anglophone literature and culture, with cross-period interests in transnational writing, Irish literature, travel writing, gender studies, Scottish studies, and Shakespeare. And recent publications include the monograph Scottish Colonial Literature's Writing the Atlantic from 1603 to 1703. And she's also currently vice chair of the German Shakespeare Society and a member of the of Irish Studies at Würzburg. So I want to thank again all of the editors for the great work they've done together this issue. And I want to hand over, I think, firstly to Maureen, who's going to tell us a little bit more about the issue and introduce our contributors.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to just give a little background, the nativity story of the um, this issue, where it came from, which is from my time in University of Würzburg, which is why so many of my editors are co-editors are there. So there's a I don't know if scheme is the right word, but this program of bringing Irish studies scholars from Ireland to German universities, and this is something that the Irish Embassy in Berlin is organizing, and it's a wonderful visiting traveling professorship, as it's called. And I got to see many parts of Germany, and part of my remit, in addition to teaching, was to organize an event. And so this was my idea. So you might get a hint from things that Seán said about my biography, that this is, an area of interest for me. But I want to, before I talk about that, I would like to, echo Seán's thanks and appreciation of Charlie and the whole editorial board and team there at RISE, because you were very enabling, efficient, supportive, helpful, responsive. I mean, it was a wonderful editorial experience working with you. And of course, I have to thank my co-editors, who were just absolutely fabulous colleagues. I don't want to get too emotional, because I really miss them. They were so lovely to work with on a daily basis, and to work with on the conference that was the kind of the origin of these essays, which happened in February of 2024. So this is a pretty quick turnaround, really, considering the slowness with which academic publishing usually proceeds. And I really want to, at least one member of the PhD group that were just an amazing team. I am so jealous. One of the things that I was constantly envying when I was in Würzburg was the incredibly talented, proactive PhD students who have been part of this process, the conference, the publication. They did all of the kind of most tedious work, and did it so well that almost didn't even have to look again at anything they had done. So that was a truly fantastic experience. Again, the various teams involved have been wonderful. So just to say a little bit about, I want to show this, give proper credit to this visual from this painting by Bridget Shelley, who has been so generous. She's never asked for a penny for any of this. She just wants her name identified and nothing else. So she's been great for the conference poster, for the website, and now for the special issue. So Irish Studies in Ireland has been a little slow to kind of just maybe about a decade slower than Irish Studies in the US to really embrace environmental humanities and animal studies. And I think there are many good reasons for that, historically and culturally and politically. Like many, colonized peoples around the world, the Irish were seen as closer to nature under the kind of, discourse of empire, more animal-like, less evolved, etc. And so there's a kind of a hangover, maybe deeply psychological hangover, as you might see like in second wave feminism. Lots of groups, when they start to kind of engage with their independence and their self-determination, I think there is a reluctance to have anything to do with old stereotypes about naturalness and animal-like kind of qualities that would tend to be derogatory and seen as kind of part of being, an inferior, oppressible peoples, whether that's because of gender, color, nationality, able-bodiedness, class, whatever it is. So, but certainly it has come on stream quite a bit in Ireland in Irish studies, environmental humanities, and animal studies. But 10 years ago. Yes, no, wait, oh no, 15 years ago, I held the first Irish Studies and Eco-Criticism conference in the world. And I think this is the first Irish animal studies conference in the world that I'm aware of. There have been lots of animal studies conferences, in the last 10 to 15 years, but I think this is the first one that focuses just on Irish studies. So, and I think it's such a rich area of inquiry because as we'll see now, Síle ní Mhurchú is going to talk about the legends of the Fianna, from ancient Irish language, pre-Christian, pre-occupation. Ireland culture has been really engaged with the non-human, and like many traditional cultures and societies, there was no feeling of strong disconnection from the non-human world, which we have, in post-Enlightenment Europe, and which has bled around the globe, has really contributed to our feeling that our feeling of separation from it, that we can exploit, destroy, pollute the non-human world with no consequences, failing to see that anything we're doing to the environment, to animals, to anything in the non-human world is hurting us. We're actually part of it, but we have kind of lost that awareness. And it's been something that has remained quite vivid, I think, in Irish culture to some extent, even if academia has been slightly slow to catch up with it here. I mean, just there are very few, I think, modern cultures that still have such a vivid presence of their mythology, of the salmon. I mean, when I just look around UCC, there's the salmon of knowledge on the side of one of the student buildings. And I think there is still a strong thread of connection with the non-human world. Obviously, very rural community up until recently. Farming is something that comes up in the next issue, a little bit the spring issue. There's a visual art and farming. And as we see here in this image, it's something that almost comes automatically to mind when thinking about Ireland. And I think that I don't want to go on too long. I could really start ranting here, but just maybe to wrap up a little bit. And here we have we've got Síle speaking to us today, Franca and Dilâra so we have Síle ní Mhurchú, Maureen DeLeo, Jochen Achilles, Franca Leitner, and Dilâra Yilmaz. Those are the contributors of this volume, this first, and three of them are here with us today. And just to say, I think the great success of the conference, which was hugely attended, and it was an absolutely vibrant and wonderful conference, as well as the riches, as Seán, which I can take no responsibility or hardly any responsibility, maybe just lighting the fire of these two issues, speaks to, I think, one of the really powerful ways in which what we do, and we can sometimes feel like we are disconnected from the world, but what we do can have real and important consequences for the way that we think about our relationship to our environment, to the world. And this is especially non-human animals. Charlie said at the beginning, we all have animals in our lives. We have pets. We have, Jenny the donkey is going to from the Martin McDonagh film is in the next issue. We have very emotional relationships with certain animals, maybe not with slugs or salmon, but there is a way in which this is a wedge that can make us start to think about the non-human world as lively and independent and something that we are inextricably part of. And at the moment, the lack of that awareness is part of what is bringing us to the brink of catastrophe. So what we do here really does matter. And I suppose I'll just end it there.
Thank you so much. I'll take over from here. Thank you. I would like to second Maureen's thank you to the entire RISE and RISE editors and EFACIS board. It's been a pleasure, a delightful pleasure to work with all of you. So thank you from my and our side as well. I'd also like to second you, thanking our wonderful student helpers. Two of them are here, Nicola Sommer and Leo Fröhlich are here. Thank you so much for all the work you've done. That was excellent and really useful for all of us here. I would also like to thank our contributors, many of whom are here. Some couldn't make it, unfortunately, today, but thank you for all keeping the deadlines, for being not only wonderfully efficient, but also being so delightful, interesting, and excellently researched papers and contributors. And many of you and many of us have edited edited several things, and it's not always given that all the papers are as interesting, as excellent, and also as on time as all of you were. So thank you on behalf of all of us for that. It's my great pleasure now to introduce one of our contributors today, and we'll start with Mhurchú, who is here today. So thank you for making the time for that, and it's my pleasure to shortly introduce her to all of us who are here tonight, and then I hand over to Síle herself, who will then introduce her article in a bit more detail at least, and we have some time here on our hands. So Síle is a senior lecturer in the Department of Modern Irish at University College Cork. And her research includes, and Maureen has already mentioned it right now, the Fionn cycle, and also the study of Irish manuscripts, the study of Irish love poetry. And she's particularly interested actually in the Fionn cycle and in narrative poems about it. And I'm not sure how to pronounce the Fianna. Is that correct? Síle, please correct me here.
Yes, that's perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And she's published widely actually on all of that. She's the co-editor of the Gaelic Finn Tradition, a collection of essays on the Fionn cycle, and she's published, which was published in 2022 by Four Courts Press. And she's currently also writing her monograph actually on the poetry of the cycle. And it's our pleasure to have you tonight, and I'll hand over to you to introduce your article now in a bit more detail.
Thank you very much, Kirsten. That was a great introduction. I think Maureen mentioned the salmon of knowledge there earlier, that's visible on the walls of UCC. So that's probably one of the most famous stories of the Fionn cycle, how Fionn gained his wisdom from eating the poor salmon. So yeah, as Kirsten said, I suppose I've been working with the Fionn cycle for most of my career because I did my PhD in that area, and it's such a rich tradition. There are so many narratives and different versions of the various narratives and so on. It's sort of an infinite resource of sort of storytelling and so on. And anybody, I'm sure some of you have read some of the tales. You would have heard of the Salmon of Knowledge and some of the other well-known tales that have been sort of circulated, that they're kind of on the school curriculums in Ireland. And if you ever read any of these books of mythology for adults or even for children, you'll find the Fionn cycle in them. But and as you'll all know, I suppose animals appear frequently in these stories. I suppose a lot of the adventures take place in this sort of very rich natural world. So this is, I suppose, pretty obvious, not really worth noting, but I remember during the pandemic, I suppose, I started thinking about it a lot because I was, I suppose, stuck in Cork City. We weren't allowed to go further than 2 kilometers from our houses. So I was, I suppose, stuck in a suburban area, and all our small parks were very crowded because everyone was using the same quite limited recreational space. And at the same time, I was trying to keep going with my research and reading these Fionn cycle texts. And I suppose this kind of wild world filled with kind of forests and mountains and so on, it just took on this kind of extra appeal. So I just found I got this kind of extra layer of enjoyment from reading about this world that I was suddenly cut off from. And I suppose at the same time as well, I mean, following current events, we're sort of hearing constantly about the problems of environmental destruction in Ireland and elsewhere. Around the same time, I read a book by Padraig Fogarty called Whittled Away, Ireland's Vanishing Nature. And I suppose it was a very interesting read. And I suppose this book sort of does what the title suggests. It is about the fact that actually we have very little sort of, there's actually very little wild space left in Ireland, really. So I suppose I was sort of thinking about that as well. It's very interesting that we have these really vivid depictions of wild, abundant animal-filled spaces in the Fionn cycle, and it's not really something we can access in Ireland today. We have a small number of national parks, but actually Padraig Fogarty goes into detail about them, and they're not maybe as natural as they seem. They have ecological problems too. So I suppose I was just thinking about that, and then I remember the call came in, I'd say from Maureen in Cork in UCC, and so I said to myself, the animal in Ireland, real and imagined, that's very interesting. And I was interested in this idea of real and imagined. So I suppose maybe the sense I had of the absence of real wild animals, that their presence is maybe more limited in Ireland now than it was in the past. And the idea of imagination as well, I suppose, because even with the Fionn cycle, it is an imaginary world, and it's always, as you'll see in some of the texts I describe, it's always told from the point of view of a character looking back at a world that was there. So I suppose it's always an already imagined. So that's kind of an interesting thing as well. You can kind of use it as an escape mechanism, but I think the texts are also telling you, well, it's all imaginary, so don't go too far with it. But yeah, so I suppose then thinking about animals, what I did basically for my paper was I just focused in on two particular narratives where I felt that animals sort of played an interesting and intriguing role. I suppose I could have covered more text. This was really just personal choice. These were just two narratives that just sort of appealed to me, where this theme jumped out. But certainly this discussion could be expanded. I'm drawing on other tales and narratives as well. As I said already, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of different narratives about this warrior Fionn, who spends much of his time hunting and living in wild landscapes. And he is a hunter. He's certainly not an animal lover in the modern sense. So one of the narratives I discussed is interesting, I think, because it presents animals both from the point of view of the hunter and the hunted. So this is the second sort of narrative that I focused in on. It's about the childhood of Oisin, the son of Fionn, and well, there are different versions, so I decided to focus on one. There are so many versions, you couldn't possibly discuss them all, although that might be worth doing, I suppose, at some point. But basically, Oisin's his mother is a deer, and he's sort of half human, well, he is human, but he grows up as a deer for the first 7 years of his life. And I was just really interested in this way that he was sort of cut off from human society and presented as living in this sort of strange, unfamiliar sort of animal, sort of it's a sort of environment. And then there's a very interesting section in the text where I suppose, as I said, Fionn is a hunter, and the Fianna often spend their times, hunting and so on, and maybe they're quite savage with animals. I don't think maybe we'd approve of the extent of their hunting in modern times, or our values have changed. But so a lot of the well sometimes animals are presented as beasts to be hunted, and they sort of celebrate the shedding of their blood and so on. But I thought it was very interesting in this narrative that it sort of breaks through this convention, and we sort of see things from the point of view of the hunted. Oisin can empathize with deer because of his deer childhood, and he can sort of feel the pain of the deer. So I thought that was interesting. So that was one of the narratives I chose. And then the other one is an earlier well, it's a poem. There are sort of 3 different versions that I discuss, and I sort of draw on them all because you need to read them all to get the full story. But again, animals feature strongly in it, and there are also shades of Noah's Ark. It's about a character of the and another member of the Fianna called Quilta, who when his leader Fionn McCool is imprisoned, he sort of goes a bit crazy and starts releasing domesticated animals around Ireland. So I thought that was sort of an interesting viewpoint. He's sort of disrupting the normal agricultural cycle, and then he's given, in order to have Fionn released, he's given this sort of quest that seems to draw maybe on the story of Noah's Ark. He's asked to collect pairs of animals and bring them to the King of Ireland, so that the King will release Fionn. And again, there are some interesting things there, I think, where animals are sort of maybe defamiliarized, and sometimes we see things from the point of view of this human trying to collect all these animals and fulfill his quest, but sometimes you seem to sort of get the perspective of the animal. So I suppose, well, you can read the paper to get the full story, but I hope maybe I've sparked your interest anyway. And it was very interesting working, taking part in this conference then, and sort of bringing in just bringing in insights and theory as well from people who have sort of worked on animals in other areas of Irish literature. So I was able to link up with studies of hunting literature and so on. I was inspired as well by some of the works of Catherine Kirkpatrick. Well, you'll see all that as you go through the article, I suppose. So yeah, that's all I have to say today. I hope you'll enjoy the article, and I think we'll be hearing more about animals in the Fionn cycle anyway, because there is a lot to be said by myself and by other people as well, hopefully. So thank you very much, Kirsten, and all of you.
Thank you so much, Sheila. That's wonderful. And yes, I'm very sure it sparked interest in your article. So great. Thank you. And I'll hand over, I think, to Ina.
Yes, thank you very much. So of course, I'd like to echo thanks that my colleagues gave to everyone involved, just to be a bit more brief here. And it's my pleasure today to introduce a former colleague of ours from Irish Studies Würzburg, Franca Leitner, who's now an academic staff member at the Department of English and Literary Cultural Studies at the University of Mannheim, where she pursues her PhD. Her PhD thesis, focuses on representations of precarity and homelessness in Irish fiction of the post-Celtic Tiger period. And she holds a master's degree in British and North American cultural studies from the University of Freiburg. And this is pretty much a fast forward now. We're entering the 21st century with Franca's article, whose title is Haunting Humans, Non-Human Animals in Tana, French in the Woods and Broken Harbour. Thank you very much, Franca, for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. I would also it has been said a couple of times now, but I would also like to say thank you for the conference organizers, to the editorial team. It was great working with all of you, also to the students who helped during the conference. It was wonderfully organized. Everyone said so, but I would just like to stress that again. So my article is very much set in contemporary Ireland, shortly before the financial crisis and then in the post-Celtic Tiger period with Broken Harbour. And I start my article by outlining the situations for non-human animals during that period. So during the Celtic Tiger and then also in the post-Celtic Tiger period. And I think also joined by an animal online. Very cute dog. Sorry. What I argue is that both during the boom period, but also in the aftermath with the financial crisis, the situation both for domesticated animals and for quote-unquote wild animals was actually quite terrible. So what we see during the Celtic Tiger boom was that animals, especially exotic animals, but also thoroughbred horses, were kind of bought as status symbols. So I mentioned these horses. I also mentioned exotic animals such as the wallaby, etc. And then with the financial crisis, we see that people could no longer afford these expensive animals. They were abandoned, they were left on the side of the road, they were given to shelters, but the shelters were also already full, etc. So we see a lot of cruelty in how non-human animals are treated during that period. And the same holds true for kind of wild animals, because, and I think that was already mentioned, we see a lot of environmental degradation. We see a loss of natural habitats for these animals, etc. Yeah, which is also linked to the building boom, which we see in Celtic Tiger Island. And these are developments that are reflected in Tana French's novels, also the kind of transformation of the Irish landscape, etc. Tana French's novels, they are crime fiction, and usually crime fiction is not kind of the genre we look at when we are looking for stories about animals. Even though if we go kind of back to the origins of crime fiction, if we look at Edgar Allan Poe's The Murders in the Rue Morgue, we also have a monkey there, an orangutan, who is then actually in the end revealed as the kind of the culprit. So animals are present in crime fiction. However, as many critics have argued, they don't feature prominently. This is a very anthropocentric genre. We usually have a detective who's human, a culprit who's human, a victim that's human, etc. But animals, and this is something, as I said, critics have pointed out, are somehow haunting, in a way, the fringes of crime fiction. And I was really interested in this concept of haunting, and I think it applies really well to Tana French's novels. And what I worked with here was Avery Gordon's theory on haunting, and she reads the ghost or the spectre as kind of a social figure, and she says it points to unresolved acts of social violence. Of course, Avery Gordon is here addressing humans once again, but I think we can also apply that to non-human animals, and we can also see haunting animals as kind of pointing to unresolved acts of violence against them, against the natural world, so to speak. And this is what we can find in these two novels that I looked at in my paper. So we see the animals that are haunting the main characters. They are never seen. We can never specify what kind of animal it is. Also, in the context of this real and imagined animal, we cannot never be sure whether the animal actually exists or not, whether it's just in the character's imagination, but they definitely feel haunted. They feel threatened by these animals. And I think that's in this context of the Celtic tiger and also of the financial crisis, it's really interesting that both times we have male characters that feel haunted by the animal. And in both cases, these men can be seen as representatives of the Celtic tiger period. So in Broken Harbour, we have Pat Spain, who worked in the financial industry, who has then lost his job and then became obsessed with this animal that he believes lives in his house. In the other novel, in the Woods, we have Adam Robert Ryan, who is suffering from amnesia, and many scholars have pointed out that his amnesia is kind of representative of the cultural amnesia of Celtic Tiger Island, and he becomes haunted by this animal. And in this case, the animal is very much also linked to the space of the woods. The novel's title is In the Woods. So the woods he believes to be haunted by this animal, even though, we never can actually see the animal. But and I think this links to what Maureen has said. In both cases, what we see is that it's never the animal or with the animal that the actual danger lies in these two texts. It's always with the humans, with the human-made economic system, and with the environmental degradation and destruction that is happening. And this is actually where the threat is and kind of the danger. I think that was it for my article. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them.
Yes, thank you very much, Franca, for your presentation. And I think at this point, I'm handing over to Maria for the introduction of our last speaker, and then we can come back to all three speakers for questions, I think. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So thank you. Of course, thank you to everybody here. Thank you to Rise, to my co-editors, to our student helpers, and of course, to all contributors to our volume, to our first volume. Yes, and it's my great pleasure today to briefly introduce Dilâra Yilmaz to you, who is a doctoral researcher and assistant lecturer at the chair of English literature at Kiel University. After completing an education, so Master of Education in German Studies, English and North American Studies and History, she went to earn a Master of Arts in English and American Literatures, Cultures and Media. And her research interests include contemporary Irish literature, Ireland's creative economy, and media representations of neurodivergence, boredom, and disaffection. And she's currently working on her PhD project, Conditions of Contemporary Irish Women Fiction Writing, which involves engaging with authors and other creatives within Ireland's literary industry. She also teaches undergraduate courses in Irish and British literary and cultural studies at the University of Kiel. So I'm very happy that you're here, like the other authors. The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much for the very kind and generous introduction. And also, I keep my thanks short, but thank you everyone involved in this issue for very smooth and very productive publishing experience. It was really nice. Yeah, so my article, my contribution is titled Irish Non-Human Animals in the Anthropocene, Non-Human Voices in Contemporary Irish Literature. And I look specifically at in English from the past 5 to 6 years, sort of the more recent wave of Irish writing. Yeah, so where I start in my article is that, as we know and have heard, Irish literature, both in the Irish and also in the English language, have always been intertwined with Ireland's native landscape and wildlife, as well as farm animals. And what I do is I look specifically at wildlife. So I exclude farm animals and pets, but I look at the depictions and the function of wildlife and contemporary Anglophone, so English language, Irish writing. And my argument is that these recent texts, they place a new emphasis on non-human animals, as in they portray them as critical observers and very attentive perceivers of human interaction with nature, or rather human intrusion into nature. So I suggest that landscape is very prominent in writing, and I count wildlife as part of landscape. And a landscape for me acts as focalization in these texts. So I've predominantly looked at depictions of animal natives to Ireland, such as crows, seagulls, hedgehogs, seals, and crabs, and show how they provide a lens through which the text comment on human impact on nature, particularly in relation to the concept of the age, which I also criticize and discuss in the article. So these non-human animals, they never really appear as protagonists or as narrators, but as focalizing instances. And through that, they criticize human intrusion into natural environments. And they do so by very grotesquely, sometimes ridiculously or humorously, displacing humans, so as to expose, I guess, their very huge or large inadequacies in natural settings. So one thesis that I follow up is that human and non-human life, they do remain entangled in these recent texts, but these texts that I look at, they uphold a binary opposition between humans and non-human animals, and then I try to discuss on how productive is that or not. So the texts that I look at specifically are short stories and novels, for example, by Sheila Armstrong and Jane Kirsten, Frances Meccan, Emma Ryan, and Soleil Manuel. So all texts from 2019 to 2023. That's the period I look at. And my argument is built, or the article is built in 3 parts. So in the first part, I sort of show that, first of all, there is a very emphasized presence of wildlife and of non-human interactions. And in these interactions, humans very often try to envision a kinship actually with non-human animals, but that always fails. And in the second part of my article, I try to illustrate how these texts always portray humans as the other and not the animals as the other. So the humans are portrayed as the other in natural settings, and they are depicted as intruders, so very negatively, who alienate wildlife from their habitat. And then in the third part, I look at examples where I gauge the agencies of non-human animals in exerting their power over humans trespassing into the natural territories. The examples that I look at, the short stories and the novels, they do show that a nature-culture dualism is sort of upheld, but not necessarily as a natural given. So rather, human and non-human bonding is repeatedly inhabited the anthropocentric nature of current systems of cultural and also economic power. And this enduring anthropocentrism actually places non-human animals into this, category of landscape, and landscape itself is a category that is inherently human. It's used to homogenize very complex systems of biodiversity. And the idea is that I put forward is that a current Irish prose fiction sort of counters the idea of a passive landscape that is merely the backdrop of a story, but is actually focalizing and perceiving what happens in order to criticize the impossibility of human, non-human harmony and symbiosis under current systems of power. Yeah. And by doing so, obviously, because they're always placed in this romanticized notion of the Irish wild West Coast, they of course subvert this idea of this wild, untamed nature, Irish nature that the tourism industry is a massive part of in destroying that, but at the same time marketing it to actually draw tourists. Yeah. And I look forward to questions if you want to know more. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction and for talking about your essay. And I think we can open the floor now for discussion, for maybe questions to one or the other author.
Before we get to that, should I just simply, or should we simply say that there are two further, to give everyone perhaps time for thinking about questions, that there are two further articles in the special issue by authors who unfortunately, contributors who unfortunately can't be here today, but at least I would perhaps say the titles and also very, very briefly say what they're about, if that's okay. The one is by Jochen Achilles, a former colleague also of ours at the University of Würzburg, who contributed an article entitled The Anthropological Machine and Non-Human Animal Agency in 19th Century Short Fiction. Many of you will probably recognize the term and the concept of the anthropological machine by Giorgio Agamben. And he uses that only as a starting point, but to then explore human, non-human entanglements in two short stories, 19th century short stories, one of them being by Irish author Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu, and he looks at the short story Green Tea, and the other one is by an American author, Harriet Prescott Spofford, and the short story here is Circumstance. And again, he looks at the human, non-human entanglements here. And then the other contribution is by Maureen who unfortunately also can't be here tonight. And that is on on animals and impaired bodies in early and mid 20th century Irish literature. And she looks at the intersections here actually between impaired bodies and animals, as the title already says. And she looks at three authors. One is Seán O'Riordan, short stories by Patrick Pearse, and then also one novel by Patrick O'Connor. The novel is Exile, and that's from mid and early 20th century Irish literature. Just for everyone who hasn't had a chance yet to look at the entire special issue so that you know which other articles are also in that. And with that, we're back to questions, if there are any.
Thank you all for that. I'm just going to leave the floor open for a little bit and hope there might be some questions or comments from people on those really fascinating introductions to the articles.
And perhaps we can already give a little sneak preview here. Some
Yes.
contributors from the next special issue are also online here today. I see Jessica is among our participants here today. So we really,
Brilliant.
so we really look forward to publishing the next special issue fairly soon already. So that will also be a fantastic issue. Jessica's article on poetry, Irish poetry, of course, perhaps for those who know her.
Yeah, I would just want to like again commend the contributors, and it was wonderful to get a couple of contributions on Irish language texts, Sheila's
Yeah.
and Maureen's. And then also in the next issue, I would just point out that there's like non-literary text, there's film, there's visual art.
Brilliant.
So, it's quite a range of media, that is considered in this through this lens. Yep.
No, I mean, it's fantastic, Maureen. I congratulate you and all of the co-editors and contributors. Really, really important. And as I said at the outset, it's also, as you've said, an area that is under-researched. And I think the response to your call is evident of the interest and the importance of the area as well. I suppose, and it's more directed at all of you, just in terms of your own kind of the inspiration initially for the conference, right? So it all started as a conference, didn't it? In Würzburg, wasn't that where it
Yeah.
began? Isn't that right?
Yeah. As I was saying, part of this professorship was part of my remit was to organize a conference, and it's something I'd wanted to do because I know that it hasn't been done.
Yeah.
So, and
It's interesting. It was in Germany, like rather than in Ireland. So I mean, it speaks to the point you made as well that it's perhaps an area that's more developed in other contexts than within the Irish context. But it's great to bring it home, so to speak, at least in terms of directing that kind of paradigm at Irish studies.
Yeah, and we had contributors from France, from Ireland, from America. We had a number of people come from North America, actually. I think Rob actually has his hand up.
Oh, sorry, Rob.
Does he? Rob Brazo.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Hi, Robert.
I didn't want to interrupt that thought. I just wanted to ask a question. Oh, hi, Seán.
Great to see you again. Hi, Robert. Great to see you again. Great
to see you again. Yeah, I don't want to I don't want to take too much time, but just to follow up on Seán's earlier invitation to people to submit themes. I was lucky enough to edit a couple of themes of Rise a few years ago, and the whole staff is fantastic to work with. So if you have an idea, you really should be in touch. Seán makes it all so easy. But I also had a question for Franca. I really enjoyed your talk. I'm interested in, like, did you find a lot of secondary literature available on this idea of status animals? Because there's a lot written on the socialization of animals, and it seems like that's one of the themes that your paper picks up on, that animals are subject to economic downturns in the same, and so they're socialized in that way. They're brought into the economy in these kinds of strange ways. But I'm interested, and I've done a little bit of research on animals in the environmental humanities, but I've not come upon really a lot of research on status animals, which I found really interesting in your talk. So if there's anything you could say about that, I would really appreciate it.
Yeah. So there's one source that comes to mind immediately, and that's I think Maria Pramajore's article on the Celtic tigers equine imaginary, so something like that. It's about thoroughbred horses and how they were kept as status animals during the Celtic tiger boom. But she also mentions, I think, briefly other animals, but there wasn't a lot of secondary research literature on that topic, I have to admit. That was the main article I based that on. There were also, of course, some newspaper articles about like after the financial crisis, how many animals were abandoned, etc. The shelters were kind of absolutely full, things like that. But yeah, I think Pramajore's article was the one I think I worked with the most in that. I have this anecdote that I start my paper with from the podcast Blind Boy Boat Club, where he talks about kind of a wallaby that was brought into a nightclub during the Celtic Tiger boom and then died, probably because it was given cocaine or something like that. So that was something I think a very graphic anecdote to illustrate that we had suddenly these exotic animals. I think he also talks about a snake that was brought to a nightclub, etc. But of course, that's not research, but more anecdotes. But I think they were quite they were illustrating my point really well.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, and I mean, some of this is going to come from more popular sources because animals are, everywhere in that way. So that's great. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Neil. Are there any other questions? I have a question of my own. If there's not, I wanted to ask Síle, mas féidir an ceiste chuirte sí a híle. Just about the Fionn cycle, because we were talking about sources there, because I mean, when we get into the Fionn, there's such a variety of sources. Where were you looking to, or what was your kind of main sources in terms of analyzing the poems and the materials that you look at in your essay?
You're right, there are a lot of sources, and I was sort of trying to, I suppose you always have to take sources into consideration when you're looking at these texts, like where did they come from? It's sort of different, you're kind of working with manuscript materials or maybe folklore collections, so it's a little bit different. You're always kind of, well, where were these taken and how many transformations did they go through before they reached us and all this kind of thing. So I mean, I suppose the first poem the first narrative I discussed has been published a number of times in different versions of it, and not always with translation either. But some have been translated, so that would make it reasonably accessible. And then the narrative about Oisin's birth and childhood is taken from a PhD thesis by the late Martin O'Brien of the University of Galway. He started out actually as my PhD supervisor, but he passed away unexpectedly not long after I started actually. But his thesis has now been digitized and it's up online. I suppose if he'd lived, he presumably would have published it as a book. So I suppose at least the thesis is online, and I was able to kind of draw on that. So but I suppose originally all these would be manuscript texts, So that was an interesting thing whilst writing. So obviously I wanted to focus on the animals, but I had to do a good bit of explaining of what is this Fionn cycle and what are these sources and why all the different versions. So I was sort of trying to bring that in, but without overdoing it and sort of putting people off.
Yeah.
But I suppose that is a challenge with this material, that a lot of the texts you're kind of still going back to maybe old-fashioned editions. We don't have modern translations and kind of accessible versions of a lot of them, so that can kind of be challenging, definitely. That said, there are new books and publications coming out all the time, so things are getting slowly better, I think. So yeah, that was an interesting challenge. Yeah. Grandma got Seán.
I'm wondering, I mean, maybe this is a very kind of a complex question to answer, maybe too in a short way, but in terms of looking at the sources from different periods, you see different emphases in terms of the way animals and the relationship between human figures and animals are portrayed, depending on the kind of source itself. Did you find differences there, or emphases differing?
It's hard to say. I suppose the texts I worked with actually are from sort of a range of centuries, because you're kind of um, I, I suppose you get that a little bit, especially with the folklore material. I do think you kind of get people's real life farming experience coming in there. Sometimes the way they talk about the Fionn McCool's dogs and so on. But that said, it is always kind of set in the past, so they're not kind of talking about animals in their own time. They're kind of talking about these wild animals that were there way back in the time of the Fianna. So there is kind of the animal that exists within the Fionn cycle doesn't always correspond exactly with the real animal. I mean,
I know, absolutely.
it's sort of tricky. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess it also depends on when I mean, the earliest manuscript from that goes back to the 8th, 9th century, right? The earliest kind of Fionn cycle manuscripts. So how the context in which the translations, or when the folklore is collected as well, will differ in terms of how they interpret or reinterpret or
Yeah.
I mean,
rework.
Christianity really, because of
Of course,
Christian sort of tradition of man's dominion over nature, I think from what I understand, really changes a lot of interpretations and translations of ancient texts, because there's, that kind of pagan closeness to the natural is something that is not amenable to a Christian ethos.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, you have St. Patrick coming into the narratives, and
Yeah,
he
of
has that sort
course,
of
yeah.
narrow sort of view, your dogs are not going to heaven, he tells
Yeah,
Oisin,
exactly.
absolutely
Exactly.
not, how ridiculous, but I think Oisin and Fionn of them definitely do represent this kind of freer space to think about animals in some ways. But as I said, then sometimes they're hunters and they're mercilessly slaying animals and so on. In a way, I suppose that wouldn't be that appealing to modern readers. So you get the two sides, and I mean there has been some very interesting research done by Elizabeth Fitzpatrick, especially, who has sort of linked sort of the information on hunting kind of encoded within the Fionn cycle. Her reading of it is that the hunting places described in some of the texts do actually correspond to places where hunting did happen historically. And I think she has a very interesting article somewhere where she argues that we don't sort of have hunting manuals for Ireland, but we can sort of take information from these texts. So yeah, even though they are sort of imaginary texts, texts of the imagination, they do sort of have a certain depth of knowledge as well about the landscape and animals inhabiting it and so on. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Karmagat. So we're
Ina,
almost out of time.
Ina has her hand up.
Okay, Ina, yes, please.
I just wanted, however briefly, to include also Dilâra in our discussion, and I think it's so interesting that we have this really wide range over such a broad or a long amount of time where we can see animals in Irish literature. And with Dilâra's article, I think it's so fascinating because when I read your article, I thought you could have gone on forever because you could have found so much more material, and you have such a lot of material, maybe and very contemporary, very up to date. I mean, Jen Carson and others material. Maybe you can say something about that to kind of round off, bring us back into the here and now, the 21st century.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think I also kept thinking about that because I was wondering, how is it that animals are just this ever constant topic throughout literary history in Ireland, but always with a different focus, but they always are sort of a component, an instrument, but also a vital essence of all sorts of storytelling. So that's something I cannot answer, but it's definitely something that we all have observed in different periods. So that's really interesting. And yeah, as regards my choice of texts, I had more because it was a cross-section study. So I had a small corpus of all texts that I read, and I noticed, that's also how the article came about, where I noticed that native animals, they're just always there watching. And they have a function, and the function is and to see how the estrangement between humans and the non-human world makes a healthy co-inhabiting the planet harder and harder. And I was wondering also how that ties into I was reading a current, short fiction, contemporary novels, but also poetry. I was looking at Channel, right, the magazine that decidedly just focuses on eco-critical Irish writing. It's an entire magazine that's been running now for a few years. And I was wondering, how is it then that, let's say, Irish studies has been a bit lagging behind in tackling animal studies or more animal-centered eco-critical writing? And I was wondering, because it's also what I noticed in the most recent texts, is that there's always this split between indulging or sort of embracing the mythological folklore part of rural wildlife, of the whatever imagined wild nature of Ireland, and this and the identity that is so entrenched in farming culture, because with the ongoing eco crises, these animals that are like cattle, they've become climate culprits, and there's this big tension between identities that are linked to both animals that seem to be on like different camps of like what animals should be protected and who are the good animals and the bad animals and the vulnerable and not, you know, which is not a very productive discussion. But yeah, so I think I don't have a good answer to your question, but it is definitely, yeah, something that is so ever present and just shows there needs to be so much more research. And I think, or hopefully we all could have, you know, contributed to a more productive discussion in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dilâra. Thank you to everybody. We're out of time, I'm afraid, so we're going to have to finish up there. So thank you all. Thank you to all the editors. Thank you to all the contributors, and thank you to everybody that joined us for this launch webinar. I've put into the link there a link to the issue itself in the chat, as well as our email at Rise and our email for Rise reviews. If you want to check out, please go, if you haven't done already, please go check out the issue, read the articles, and please share the news with your colleagues, with your social media contacts. And not only will you find a wonderful range of articles on this theme, it'll also whet your appetite for our next issue, which will also continue on this theme. And in fact, as Maureen has said, it brings it into additional discipline areas like film and visual culture, as well as literature. So thank you all, and good night, good evening, take care.